What is the burning issue? Well, today it's Blades of Fire, a newly announced game with a very close release date by Mercury Steam, a Madrid-based studio whose previous titles include the Castlevania trilogy. Strap yourselves in! Let me just start by saying Blades of Fire isn't a Souls-like. I would personally think more along the lines of the recent God of War games. It's, at its core, an action RPG with beautiful graphics, an interesting fantasy backdrop, and quite a deep, unique combat system. There are actually quite a few little unique systems and gameplay loops, which we will get into throughout the video. The story, essentially, is that one day, in this fantasy, medieval-y kind of land, there was a queen who conquered the world by casting a spell that turned all steel into stone, thereby rendering the weapons of the people fairly useless, and allowing her soldiers to grasp power with an iron or steel fist. We play as Aaron, a blacksmith who very quickly comes into possession of a magic, legendary hammer of the gods, which allows him to forge steel once more. This is key to the gameplay, crafting the weapons using various types of weapon and attack style based on the enemy you're up against, repairing, and then eventually recycling weapons forms the basics of how you actually level up in the game. I'll talk more about that shortly. You were also joined on your journey by a little lad called Adzo, a scholarly boy who was in the care of an abbot when you met him. He knows all about things like history and maths and, he helps you unlock the secrets and understand the world of Blades of Fire as you go through your adventure. In the 3 to 4 hours I got with the game, I managed to meet a couple of other characters who no doubt will start to slowly form the main cast throughout the story. The writing so far seems pretty good, the narrative straightforward, but also with lots of hints that there is much more lore and deep stories to find as you play the game. So before I ramble off too far into talking about the story, let's double back to weapon forging and how weapons are the main pillar of the game. By using anvils around the map, Aaron is teleported by the magic hammer into some kind of godly forge. Here you are safe away from the world and can peacefully forge your weapons. They are very customizable, nameable, and allow you to dictate how they handle, how durable they are, how big their parry window is, and how much and what type of damage they do. There is a minigame for hammering out the steel into the right shape, and based on your performance, this will grant you stars which represent how many times the weapon can be repaired. This minigame can be quite time consuming, especially if you're crafting hundreds of weapons. There is, however, a memory of the forge option, where you can reforge a weapon you've previously made, repeating your successes or failures without having to play the minigame again. Once you've made some weapons, naturally you go out smashing enemies with them, but the weapons, depending on how well you forge them, can only be repaired a certain amount of times before they fully break. Eventually, you must recycle old broken weapons, and you reclaim materials as well as that weapon's experience. Each weapon has a kind of level of its own, which slowly builds up the more enemies you kill with it, and the more stabbing, slamming and slashing you've done with that spear, hammer or sword before it breaks will mean you get better rewards. There is a sharpening mechanic which slowly reduces the durability, but by sharpening it re-hones your blade again so it does maximum damage once more after becoming dull on troll skulls or whatever. Hitting stone walls in corridors or caves will dull your blade's edges too, so you do have to take care when slashing and slamming around. There are also runes that you discover later, and I'm sure even deeper ways to enhance your weapons as you get more and more into the game. The one thing I would say to compare this game to Dark Souls, if I must, is that when you die, you drop whatever weapon it is that you're holding at the time. You have to run back to where you died and retrieve your weapon. It is possible to hold 4 weapons at once, which you can switch between, and have many more in an inventory accessible when not in combat. Retrieving lost weapons is important, as I mentioned. They have materials and a kind of experience within them, so leaving a drop weapon would be akin to just abandoning some souls after you died in Dark Souls. Combat is logically the next thing to touch on. What to do with the weapons you've made. Aaron can attack in 4 directions: overhand, uppercut, left side and right side, and you can do every attack as a long press charge attack too. I found that certain weapons chain the strikes together nicely, but there didn't seem to be any special combos. Consecutive attacks definitely do more damage, and whilst there is no backstab animation, hitting enemies in the back also definitely did critical damage. There is a dodge with a double tap to dodge roll, a block, and, if pressed at the right time, a parry. Stamina in this game doesn't really replenish very quickly when you're just standing in front of an enemy like it does in, say, Dark Souls. It's kind of unique in that you have to hold block and Aaron kind of glows blue a little bit and you'll see the stamina replenish very quickly. I think this is to try to encourage players to go a bit more toe-to-toe with enemies. You're not just fat rolling all over the place dodging attacks. If this is your style, you can really lean into it and forge your weapons to have much larger block bars. And I was told by one of the devs that essentially you could make a build where you're able to full face tank, big hits from the bosses and things like that. Most of the weapons also have alternate stances you can quickly switch between. For the spear, for example, there's a stance which prioritizes thrusting forward and another that does large swinging arcs. As I mentioned earlier, hitting walls with your weapon will work down its durability. And when you're inside buildings, you may want to switch to a more close quarters stabbing motion, and perhaps later, if you're surrounded by enemies in a field, perhaps a nice big swinging, wheeling spear motion would probably do you well there. There is no jump button, but lots of points in the game where there are options to interact, where Aaron will climb or vault over things, slip through tight passages, or just kick down a door. There is full damage, however, and you can walk off the edges of cliffs or balconies and fall to your doom. You've also got a couple of options on the D-pad. Hold left to quickly sharpen your weapon, tap down to drink a healing flask, tap up to prompt for a hint. This will be either Aaron speaking to himself, reminding you of what's next, or Adzo discussing what's around you. And finally, hold right to dismiss or re-summon Adzo. So basically you can magically send him back to the camp if you're sick of him parroting on in your ear, or summon him back if you want to hear from him and need some insight. So who is this Adzo I've just mentioned? He's basically a little boy that you meet at the start of the game whose parental guardian is no longer able to look after him. Golly! Adzo is actually very useful, and another reason why I mentioned God of War earlier. He does act in a way like Atreus, but he doesn't really get involved in any combat. He's a companion who is clearly more educated than Aaron, and you can tap the hint button, as I just said, when you're walking around and have him explain what the ancient writing on the wall means, or you can fully enter conversations with him and discuss plot narratives or newly discovered items. There is no main story quest per se in this game. No quests of any real kind. No chapters or side quests. It's an adventure and you can play through it as you see fit. All you really know at the start of the game is that the Queen needs to die and it's your job to give her the chop. Literally. Adzo takes notes as you play and slowly builds up a compendium of knowledge about the world Aaron and he have discovered. As you defeat more and more of the same enemy type, Adzo will make observations about the enemy weaknesses or special things you might need to do to get the better of them. I'm quite intrigued to see how well this system works throughout the major narrative of the game. But I do think it will, promote exploration, hopefully give us a sense that we really are on our own adventure and that we're not just following some kind of golden exclamation marks until the end. I only had 3 to 4 hours with the game in total, but I did find myself checking in with Adzo's journal to see what new things he'd written, little scribbles he does, and, just kind of catching up on what I've explored so far. The only thing I've not really touched upon yet is the enemies themselves. The enemies all have an outline when you lock onto them. Green means you can stab good here. Yellow means, okay, you can stab, but it's just light to medium stabbing. And red means no can stab here. It's a very simple colour-coded way of knowing that your current weapon can or can't damage that enemy, or even that enemy's specific body part. The Blades of Fire website says that there are over 50 enemy types, and I did see quite a few during my brief time with the game. There's definitely enough variation to make the gameplay feel fun. Each fight doesn't devolve into the same fight over and over and over again. One cool feature with the bosses is that they have a dazed phase after you knock down their initial health bar. During this phase, you have to mutilate them, cutting off a limb or even their entire face. The boss then reacts to that, as you would, changing its attack patterns based on what you did. Eventually, they regenerate from the mutilations, but each time you do it, it will remove a large portion of their maximum health bar until eventually they go down. I fought a troll boss a few times, and when I was playing, the one time I cut his face off. And, well, he didn't have any eyes left, so he was slamming around, blindly, reaching out with his hands and trying to find me. Later in the fight, I cut off the arm which he was holding his club with, so he started projectile vomiting at me. And also, with his other hand, then reached around to his arse and, yes, started throwing giant globs of shite at me. I'm interested to see how many more attack variations and strategies you can employ while using this system on the various bosses. Another little feature I found that I thought was quite cool was, killing X amount of various creature unlocked new weapon types for me in the forge. So that became a little quest, if you like, where I had to kill 60 ghouly zombie lads, and eventually I unlocked the greatsword blueprint. There was also a few enemy types where mid-combat they changed the formation of where their armor was. There was like an elemental creature that had, it was made of water, but it had armor plates in various places, and after you'd done a certain amount of damage to him, he kind of splooshed down into the water, into the ground, and then came back up, and his armor was in different places. So you had to kind of pay attention to, where can I actually hit him. Exploration wise, the map is good. It's clear to read and nicely interactive with clouded areas that show you what you've yet to discover. There are lots of treasure chests with HP and stamina gems in. When you collect 4, it increases your max HP or stamina, I think, akin to God of War with the apples. Anytime you discover an anvil on the map, it instantly becomes a fast travel point, as well as a checkpoint which lets you rest or teleport to the Forge of the Gods and make more weapons. Again, people who absolutely love Dark Souls will say, oh, they're like bonfires, and I guess they are really. There's also lots of little puzzles and secrets, lots of statues where if you're holding a matching weapon to the statue, when you interact with it, you unlock a new pommel or blade variant for that specific weapon in the forge. These are nicely marked on the map when you find them, so you don't have to manually remember where they are later. There was one puzzle I did that was kind of very standard. You pick up a power battery or whatever and then move it over to a different place, and it changes the location of where there are bridges so you can get to different areas. The only negative I actually have to say is that the control scheme didn't allow for having dodge on circle or B on Xbox. Obviously I was playing with the build of the game that isn't the final build, and I was told that there will be some alternative control schemes coming. However, I was told that none of them would include an option where square, triangle, X and circle would be anything other than overhead attack, uppercut attack, left attack and right attack. I understand where they're coming from with mapping the attacks like this, but 10 years of action RPG muscle memory did get me killed a lot. I got into a panic with a fight and I instinctively pressed O to try and dodge roll and ended up doing a right attack. But for the amount of times that I accidentally took damage just because of this muscle memory thing, it was starting to get on my nerves. I really hope the team do add some options for customizing button mapping, not only for me, but for a myriad of accessibility reasons, especially for players with disabilities. I get wanting to have an identity for your gameplay and controls, but sometimes it's best to just let players decide how they want to play your game. Overall, I really enjoyed my time with the game. The art style looks great, the gameplay was fun, and the little taste I had put me in the mood for more exploring and discovering of the lore and the world building that the game has to offer. Now what's cool is that there isn't really long to wait. The game is out on May 22nd, so if we don't get any more hands-on before then, expect to see me getting stuck into Blades of Fire in May. I'd like to say a quick thank you to Mercury Steam and 505 Games for inviting me down to check out the game, and let me know what you thought in the comments. Like and subscribe, smash the bell. Much love. Bye bye.